Hello, and welcome to Still Behind the Bench. My name is Adam, and on this channel, I will attempt to describe the science behind distilling spirits in a more technical way. You can think of it as an introductory level college course. Hopefully, it'll whet your appetite to learn more and teach you enough so that you are more self-sufficient. So for this video, I'm going to talk about methanol, how it's formed, where it comes from, and how to stifle its production. And then in part 2, I'm going to talk about what happens to methanol during distillation. So let's get started. Methanol. There's a lot of misunderstanding, or misinformation I should say, about methanol when it comes to spirits. Where it comes from, how it's made, and whether or not you can prevent it from being created in the first place. I hope I can provide enough information to relieve any fears you have about methanol. And I'll start by saying flat out, you don't have to worry about methanol production. The fears surrounding it came from mostly from the US government during Prohibition, and then from stories where unscrupulous people are adulterating properly made spirits with methanol in order to increase the volume so they can turn around and sell more product, and it ends up injuring or killing people. But properly made spirits, they do contain methanol, but they can only contain very, very small amounts. Nothing that'll really hurt you. So, where does methanol come from? To put it plainly, it comes from a molecule called pectin. Probably heard of it before. It's the same stuff that's used in jams and jellies to thicken them up. Pectin is a complex polysaccharide. Saccharide meaning it's a sugar or sugar base, and it's made up of galactose sugars which have been oxidized. So here's our galactose sugar, and it's been oxidized to contain a carboxylic acid group. That turns it into galacturonic acid. And then there's a chain of them, and that's what makes it a polysaccharide. So what happens to this galacturonic acid? So you have your carboxylic group on here, and the majority of the galactose molecules are going to have this carboxylic acid group. But some of them are what's called methylated. And instead of a carboxylic group, it has a methoxy group on it. There's a third type where instead of the methoxy group, it'll have an amine, which is just NH3, but that doesn't really concern us right now. So this is the group where our methanol is formed from. What happens is when the fruit, vegetable, whichever plant you're using, because all plants have pectin in them, it helps create the structure of the cell wall. So when these plants start to ripen, or I should say when the fruit or vegetable starts to ripen, it will produce an enzyme called pectin esterase, or pectin methyl esterase. They're the same enzyme, just two different names. So what happens is this giant enzyme will come along and it will break this bond here. Or I should say, it will help water break that bond because it's a hydrolysis reaction. At the same time as it's breaking that bond and removing that methyl group, it's also breaking apart water, and it's going to attach one of those hydrogen atoms to this point, making this a galactronic acid. And it's then going to take the other part of that water, the hydroxyl, and it's going to attach it to this methyl group, creating methanol. And this is where methanol comes from. The action of this enzyme demethylating this galactronic acid and then attaching a hydroxyl ion onto the end of that methyl group, creating methanol. So while this might seem complex, I've tried to whittle it down to the easiest to understand parts of it. There are things you can do to prevent this enzyme from acting. One of them is, actually I'll use a different color for this one, calcium ions, Ca2+. When you have calcium ions in your mash or wash, what some of them will do is bond to the same spot on the enzyme that the enzyme uses to bond to the pectin molecule. So then it no longer can bond to that pectin molecule. Essentially, it becomes inert. How much do you need? Essentially, the amount that you'll find in regular tap water is about as much as is useful. It won't deactivate all the PME enzyme. In order to do that, you would need to do something like denaturing, which is the next option you have. You can try to mash as quickly as possible. Mash as quickly as possible. Then boil the mash. When you boil it, all the enzymes will become denatured. Now none of them will work. And that's fine. As you go into the fermentation, you don't want this PME enzyme to continue breaking down any pectin that's dissolved in the mash. You want your enzymes to be deactivated. You can then go back and add more amylase enzymes to break down any starches that weren't broken down before you boiled. And this is the second way you can try to limit the amount of methanol being produced. The third way will be two other enzymes. One of them is called polygalacturonase. Polygalacturonase. The second one is pectolase, also known as just pectolase. What these enzymes will do is actually break up the pectin molecule before PME even has a chance to attach to a part of that part of the pectin molecule and break off the methyl group. The issue is that these two enzymes will only work as fast as the PME enzyme can. So while it will slow down the creation, and the same goes for the calcium and the boiling method, methanol will still be created. There's really no way to stop methanol from being created if you're using a fruit or vegetable. Grains, they don't really create a whole lot of methanol in the first place. If you look at the insides of a grain, so here's our grain, and we have our germ, and the rest of it is endosperm with our starches. So we got bran, endosperm, and then the germ where the embryo is. There is another layer in here in between the bran and the endosperm, and it's called the aileron layer, and in that layer is where most of the pectin will be found, and it essentially attaches itself to the bran. The aileron layer is essentially attached to the bran, and it does not like to come off even after mashing and boiling and removing as much of the starch as you can. Most of that pectin will stay stuck in that aileron layer, so you don't have to worry, especially with grains, about methanol production, because not much, even less, is produced here than with anything else. And then of course, if you're doing a sugar wash, no methanol will be produced because there's no pectin, unless for some reason you're adding pectin. So in terms of what feedstocks produce the most methanol potential, I'll say, stone fruit are up there. That's things like plums and apricots. Citrus fruit. Mostly in the peel and the pith. And the same goes for the next one, potatoes. Surprising to a lot of people, these are high in pectin, specifically in the skins. So if you're going to use these three, one of these three, or all three, for some weird concoction, if you're going to use any of these three, stone fruit, remove the stone, peel it if you can. Citrus, peel it if you can. Potatoes, peel it if you can. Do your mashing and then try and remove as many of the solids as possible, and you will significantly minimize the amount of methanol produced. If you then add in calcium, which you may have to if you're starting with something like a reverse osmosis water or distilled water. If you're using tap water, you won't really need to add calcium unless you're trying to balance pH, and then that will also help stifle the PME enzyme. And then once you're done mashing, you can just boil it and denature any enzyme that's in there. And that's how methanol is formed, where it comes from, how to stifle its production. The next video will be on what happens to it when you distill it, and I imagine for some of you it'll be quite a surprise what happens. I hope this wasn't too complicated. If you liked the video, please click the like button. If you want to see more, please subscribe. Click that bell for a notification of new videos. If you want me to do a video on a specific topic, leave a comment, send an email, and we can discuss it. Thanks for watching. Have a great week.